Please join me in welcoming a premier who doesn't flinch when it counts, who governs with courage and clarity, and who stands up for not the ideology, but for her land, her people, and for the future of this province. Please welcome the Honourable Premier Danielle Smith. This is not the premier.
How to disappoint a large and excited group. My apologies. Premier Smith is just delayed by a couple of minutes, but we are looking forward to bringing her up on stage. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
We'll have her with us. Yes. That doesn't happen for me. That happens for Premier Smith. So she'll come up in a few moments and give a quick keynote address, and then we'll have a fireside chat and talk a while. It's my pleasure to do this again for those of you that were at the Ottawa edition of Canada Strong and Free Network events. We did this just back in April, and it's also a pleasure because I've known Premier Smith off and on for about 15 years. Is she ready? All right. Now you can stand up and applause again for Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.
Why, thank you. Thank you. I hear you just gave a standing O to Brian Lilley. You know, this is a good thing about him having been an old radio and TV guy. He just has to roll with the punches. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation together. And so thank you for the introduction. And it is, I have a few prepared remarks, so I'll go through those, and then we'll get into a little bit more interaction a bit later. But it is such a pleasure to welcome you here today, and welcome everyone to Calgary. If you're from out of province, I should probably find out how many out of province folks do we have here. Wow, look at that. Almost half the room. That's fantastic. Welcome here. So you'll probably know that there's a bit of a difference in conservatism in Alberta than in other provinces. And let me maybe see if I can help to explain a bit about why that is, because I know you're discussing conservatism in our nation and the critical role of the West. And so when we talk about conservatism, we often focus on policies and politics, but the values that underpin our movement are far older and more profound. They are, in the case of Alberta conservatism, it is the values of the pioneers who first settled our land. They were a people who came to a vast and open country with little more than the clothes on their back and the belief in their ability to build a better life here with their families. And that is a truly great nation-building project. They embraced the spirit of radical free enterprise and rugged individualism. They understood that prosperity was not a handout, but a harvest, a direct result of hard work and thrift, and a commitment to family and community. And keep in mind, we've only been established as a province since 1905, so a lot of the growth and development happened here over 120 years. And that's part of, again, I think the reason why we have a little bit of a different founding story than the Conservatives that go further east. It's the pioneer spirit that is not a historical footnote. It is a living, breathing part of our identity. It is the grit and innovation you see in our entrepreneurs every single day. And these values, fiscal responsibility, limited government, and individual liberty, are the very values that allowed the West to flourish. They're the reason why Alberta is and always will be the economic engine of Canada. We have always known that low taxes and a focus on reducing red tape are the most effective ways to create jobs and grow our economy. It's just a matter of common sense. We are a province that proves that pro-growth, low-tax, free market policies are the path to prosperity. This, it is. And this prairie conservatism has always been about more than just numbers on a balance sheet. It is about a fundamental belief in the dignity of every individual and the power of communities to solve their own problems. It's about building a society where people are free not only to succeed, but are also encouraged to help one another when times get tough. We are a strong and free people, and we always stick together. The historical roots of these values run deep. The people who settled here faced immense challenges, harsh winters, vast distances, and a complete lack of infrastructure. They had to be self-reliant, but they also had to work together. And this balance between individual strength and community cooperation is the essence of prairie conservatism. It is a belief that the government's role is not to be a master, but to be a partner, to get out of the way so people can build their businesses, their farms, and their communities and take care of their families. Today, as we face new challenges, we have to go back to these foundational values. We have to continue to advocate for our people. We have to ensure that our industries, from energy to agriculture to the new industries in technology, are free to innovate and compete on the global stage. We are a nation-building province, and we must ensure we continue to build for the good of all Canadians. There have always been those who oppose free enterprise, who stand in the way of innovation and the standards of freedom and self-determination. They would rather choose winners in the name of a narrow and limited ideology that villainizes outsiders and preaches against prosperity. And the last 10 years have made that more evident than ever. If you didn't see the video that I released earlier this week, let me highlight some key points that I made there. We all know that Canada is suffering right now with its economy. The last few years have brought an unprecedented inflation crisis, high unemployment, declining GDP, plummeting productivity, and hundreds of billions in capital investment that has fled out Canada for other countries. A massive and unsustainable federal deficit, and of course the US tariff threat, which has exposed just how dependent we are on one single country for the vast majority of our exports. It has been an extremely difficult period, and many don't seem to want to even recognize that there is a problem. But the good news is that with a few simple policy changes, the federal government could meaningfully reverse these trends. They could create hundreds of thousands of jobs, attract back hundreds of billions of dollars in investment, bolster GDP growth, diversify our trade markets, and create new revenue streams for federal and provincial budgets, all without the investment of new tax dollars. All that's standing in the way of that is some common sense and, it must be said, a bit of courage by our Prime Minister. Because more than a century and a half after those prairie homesteaders came to our land, one thing is still true. You see, Canada has among the largest supply of valuable natural resources on Earth. On a per-person basis, our endowment of natural resources far exceeds China and Europe and Russia and even the United States. And it's not even that close. We have incredibly fertile lands and oceans, unmatched supplies of timber, uranium, and potash, a treasure trove of critical minerals in every province and every territory. And here in Alberta, we literally live on top of more than a trillion barrels of oil and more than a quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. These oil and gas resources represent an incalculable tens of trillions of dollars of potential wealth for our country if we would just develop it. And if we do, that means hundreds of thousands of new great paying jobs, hundreds of billions in taxes and royalties that could be used for government services and infrastructure, and potentially trillions more in all of the spin-off industries that can develop, like AI data centers and petrochemicals, environmental technology, and a host of other industries that would benefit profoundly from the wealth generated from its development. But for the past 10 years, the federal government, led by Justin Trudeau, put in place a series of laws and regulations designed to target and phase out of existence Canada's largest economic sector, oil and gas. I know that in Ontario, they think the auto sector is the largest industry. It's not, it's oil and gas. We have about $150 billion dollars worth of oil and gas exports that go back and forth across to the United States. But first, how did they do this? They made new pipelines virtually impossible to build through the passage of the unconstitutional C-69. We call it the No New Pipelines Bill. It had so much confusion and uncertainty and red tape that Canada earned a reputation as one of the very worst places to invest in the world. They didn't stop there, though. The Liberals then specifically targeted what is possibly the most valuable single deposit of natural resources anywhere, and that's the Alberta oil sands. They completely banned all oil tankers off the northwest BC coast, effectively landlocking a multi-trillion-dollar asset that would have enriched the lives of Canadians for generations. And then to cap it off, the federal government announced an impossible-to-achieve oil and gas emissions cap, or more accurately, a production cap that makes new oil and gas production effectively impossible. And if they stay with the stringency they're proposing, would mean we would have to shut in up to 2 million barrels of production by 2035. So the funny thing about this particular emissions cap is that it wasn't imposed on any other type of production. It wasn't put on aluminum, it wasn't put on cement, it wasn't put on steel. The cap was placed on just one single sector, oil and gas. And the Conference Board of Canada just released a report, as I mentioned, that not only would the cap cost the Alberta economy roughly $1 trillion in GDP, 150,000 jobs, and $200 billion in provincial revenues by 2050, but it would also impact federal fortunes too. No other nation would ever think to do what Canada has done in the last decade and phase out its most valuable assets worth tens of trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs for people. But there is one silver lining to these economic challenges. I think Canadians right across the nation are waking up to what has happened. We are now starting to understand that we have only been hurting ourselves. We are far too economically dependent on one customer. And if we want to be economically prosperous and independent again, we have to take advantage of the incredible endowment of resources that we enjoy. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to get that started either. I have often talked about the 9 bad laws. But let me just tell you the 3 that he could get started on right away that would immediately turn our nation's economic fortunes around. First, announcing that Canada would no longer be implementing the oil and gas production cap. That would send a clear signal that Canada wants to expand oil and gas production and reduce emissions through technology and innovation rather than by capping resource development. Second thing, we'd like him to announce that Canada will be repealing the oil tanker ban this fall. The federal government can then work with BC and Alberta and Indigenous leaders to build a new resource corridor and bitumen pipeline to ports in the northwest BC coast to access new markets in Asia, which is where the greatest growth opportunity lies. And third, announce an overhaul of the C-69 No New Pipelines law. And I raise these topics in this context today for one reason. That the spirit that united our nation from Tofino to Charlottetown would not exist under the rhetoric and ideology that has prevailed over the last decade in this nation. The nation that truly, the nation that built railroads across a continent could not have happened under the last 10 years. The Somme, Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele, the liberation of the Netherlands, those victories came from a belief in the natural freedoms of Canada and the strength of our values. And we need to find that again. We need to restore the spirit of the homesteaders. We need to remember the farmers and the miners and the fishermen, the builders of railroads and the navies and the warriors who looked apocalypse in the face. And stood firm. I am incredibly optimistic about the future of Alberta and Canada. We have a resilient economy, a hardworking population, and a shared commitment to building a prosperous future for generations to come. With that, let's get into a good conversation.
Good to see you again, Premier.
Nice to see you.
Belated happy 120th birthday to you. You're looking great. That's for all of you. That's not for Premier Smith. Big celebration, though. This is important.
It is important. You know, as I was going around to it's very interesting that our birthday, September 1st, happened to fall on Labor Day.
I saw you get some flack for that
But
on social media.
But you know what? It actually is very telling because I don't think that there is a harder working people than the people of Alberta. And so we were able to tie those two together. It was a really good celebration. And it also, it capped off, I was at a rodeo. It kind of capped off the rodeo summer. And when you think about why do we celebrate rodeo? Well, it's fun to do. We get to dress up as cowboys. And we get to be able to enjoy some incredible competitive athletes. But it also harkens back to those Western values that I was talking about. We celebrate our Western values every single year, and it reminds us that we are different, we are special, and those same values, they just build into every person who comes here and wants to make a living and build a business and be wealth creators and job creators. So that celebration is really important.
Last time you and I did one of these fireside chats, it was in Ottawa. I opened up by asking you, how does it feel to be a traitor? Because that's what people were calling Premier Smith. I think wrongly, and I told you that at the time. Now I'd like to ask you what it's like to have all the people calling you a traitor adopt your recommendations, your policies. Your policies that got you called that are now in vogue.
Well, isn't the left funny, hey? That when a conservative politician says something, it's outrageous. But when the Liberal Prime Minister says something, oh my goodness, what a statesman. Isn't he being very reasonable in how he's approaching Donald Trump? Well, absolutely right. So I just can't believe that you have to tell me how the Eastern Liberal media is able to do those kinds of mental gymnastics, that they're able to
I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Completely go a 180 when the party that they tend to be aligned with says something, but they're immediately out there trying to criticize a conservative for saying the same.
Very similar to you speaking to Ben Shapiro, which I thought was very smart. You went down to Florida, talked to Ben Shapiro, and then, what happened the next day? He's speaking to his audience of 9-10 million people, telling them that the tariffs on Canada are a really bad idea and this shouldn't be happening. But you were pilloried for that. The Liberal cabinet was supposed to hear from the president of the Heritage Foundation and the guy behind Project 2025 this week, and CBC described that in the most, very nice tones. Isn't this smart?
Well, we met with the Heritage Foundation when Donald Trump first got elected because we knew that the Heritage Foundation was one of many different influential groups on him. And we wanted to understand what kind of policies he was advocating to see if there was some way that we could frame our talking points and our interests in terms of the U.S. president's interests. You probably also saw that they had to hire a high-priced consultant to teach them how to talk to Republicans.
But they were all Democrats.
Well, this is the absurdity, I think, of what we see at the federal level. They were so in the bag for the Democrats that they didn't bother reaching out to find out who the Republicans were. I can tell you, we have a tremendous Washington office. It was led by James Rajat, now led by Nathan Cooper. And our approach has always been, you got to talk to the Democrats because if the White House has a Democrat in, they pull from the governors and the House of Representatives and the Senate from their side of the aisle. So you've got to meet all those guys. And then same in the reverse. You have to know who the future secretaries are going to be. They have not done any of that work in the United States at the embassy level. And so now they're playing catch up. Whereas I was on the air at the same time you were through Trump 1. And so I spent a lot of time studying this guy. I spent a lot of time trying to understand why he does the things that he does. I read his book. I read Lighthizer book. I even read a little bit about his favorite president, McKinley, so that I could understand what it is that he's trying to achieve. And that's far, far more powerful. Part of the reason I also talked to Ben Shapiro's audience is that I wanted them to stop talking as if Canada wanted to be the 51st state. And so I don't know if it got reported. May have gotten into trouble. These were people who flew across the country to go to this Purdue. Is it Purdue? Prager University. Prager University event. So these are some of the most well-heeled supporters of the Republican movement. And I said, do you know what happens if Canada joins? You have just added another California, and there will never be another Republican in the White House. What are you thinking? And I think that the calls for us to become the 51st state ended up subsiding quite a bit after that. But, then it was, okay, well, does Alberta want to join? And you know what I say? I say, I do not want to trade an overbearing government in Ottawa for an overbearing government in Washington. Let's not forget let's not forget that as bad as Justin Trudeau was, Keystone XL was also canceled 5 seconds after Joe Biden got elected as the Democrat president. So we have to make sure that we're asserting our economic case, regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of who is in Ottawa. But I just wanted to let you know that was also one of the other reasons, is that what I realized with Trump is he is going to be influenced by the people who give his party money, who are his supporters, who are his job creators. He's not going to be influenced by me going in and saying, oh, poor me, you're going to hurt my businesses. That is not the way to talk to him. The way you talk to him is you talk in terms of mutual interest, and most importantly, in the American interest. And there's a lot of American interest in maintaining their economic ties with Canada, but Alberta in particular.
In terms of diversifying, I think repealing Bill C-69 is vital. You've long called for that, but in your video this week, you said amend it. Are you softening the language, or is there a reasoning behind that? What's the thinking?
I think it probably should be a repeal and replace, because the reality is that the federal government does have the regulatory oversight over cross-border pipelines and cross-border transmission lines. So you can't just leave a vacuum. You can't just have no regulation, but you need to have smart regulation. There's a whole section that needs to be repealed where they deign to step in and tell us how to approve projects that are 100% within our own borders. That part can be repealed, but they need to revise how they do the regulatory process for how they do cross-border assessments. Because do you remember, like you probably know some of the details on that. Like they were asking, there was a whole conversation about being able to do a gender analysis to make sure that man camps did not have a disproportionate impact on women. And I think there was some sort of intersectionality issue about whether or not it was inclusive enough. And like a pipeline is a technical decision-making process that you
There's no gender to a pipeline, unless you're speaking French.
That's true.
In French, everything has a gender.
So that's why it would have to be, but why it would have to be revised, because there are some substantial sections that are going to be extremely problematic because they're so subjective. They have to get back to a technical analysis of doing these things and remove the ideology out of them, and then get out of provincial affairs altogether.
So how optimistic are you? You said you're optimistic about Alberta's future, about Canada's future, about Prime Minister Carney working with you. We saw an announcement yesterday that I welcomed on many fronts because he was talking my language. I've said since January 20th, this is not just about tariffs. Get rid of the tariffs tomorrow. We've still got to alter the way our economy runs. Donald Trump is fundamentally altering the global trading system, and we have to adapt. So he was talking about that. He was talking about support for canola. He was pausing but not scrapping the EV mandate. That's a good start. Are you optimistic that he'll move on the issues that you're raising? You've gone from 9 to 3. Any hope?
We need all 9, but there's certain ones that he has to get started on right away. If we're going to get our bitumen pipeline to the Northwest BC coast, you have to have a rewrite of the C-69 policies. You have to get rid of the tanker ban, and you have to get rid of the emissions cap. No point in building a brand new shiny pipeline if you can't encourage your oil producers to fill it. And even if it is filled, you're not allowed to load it on a ship to export it anywhere. Like those are sort of I call it the table stakes. Those are the minimum they have to do to at least allow us to get a bitumen pipeline built. And then we have to do the others as well. I wish he had just made the decision not to get rid of the net zero vehicle mandates, because I can tell you, you should all go and talk to your local dealership. Because I can tell you, I've talked to one dealership. I don't want to call them out. I just want you to know. But one dealership has said that they're going to stop selling gasoline and diesel vehicles in January. They're only going to carry EV and hybrids. Another dealership is going to.
Why?
That's how their implementation of the policy.
Wow.
Yeah, they're going to stop selling, because remember how it works, right? You have to sell 20% of your vehicles as electric vehicles. So if you can't get the electric vehicle and hybrid inventory, the only way to meet that 20% is to reduce the gas-powered and diesel vehicles that you're selling. So Alberta buys about 200,000 cars. So we're supposed to, out of nowhere, start buying 40,000 hybrid EVs. right? So if we can't do that, if we only buy 5,000 hybrid and EVs, just do the math on that. It means that they're going to have to reduce the amount of gas-powered and diesel vehicles. So don't worry, we're just going back to the old Soviet system where you can just sign up to be able to get your car in 2030 and you'll get your dishwasher in 2031, right? What's that old
But
joke?
the plumber's coming in the morning, so you better pick up in the afternoon. Old Reagan joke. But look, by not getting rid of the EV mandate completely, he has not helped the auto industry, which I know is none of your concern too much, but he hasn't helped it because it hasn't given them certainty. Your industry needs certainty as well. TC Energy and Enbridge just announced their capital spend for the coming year. Where's it going?
US.
Yeah. So without certainty, you're not going to get the proponent coming forward and saying, I will back that Northwest pipeline. What do they need to do to give your industry in oil and gas certainty?
Well, I can tell you, I think that our industry will always find a way. They always have, even with the past 10 years of anti-energy policy. Somehow, after all of the other pipeline proposals had fallen and Kinder Morgan's was the last one and they were about to pull out, finally they were motivated to act, bought the pipeline, built it at 5 times the cost the private sector would have. And at least it got built. But that was a failure of process in my view. If that's the only way to get a pipeline built in this country, we have not learned anything. But what our industry does is they look at existing lines and they say, how can I twin that? How can I loop it? How can I use compression? How can I put new lubricants in there to be able to get more volume? And they keep on doing that. So some of these American projects are actually going to help with Canadian production if we get rid of the emissions cap. I've seen at least 2 million barrels per day of egress proposals that would bring more down to the United States. And so I suppose that would be the path of least resistance, is just working with the Americans.
But that's still selling at a discount.
I would say it's worse than that. It's actually allowing, because what happens is they buy it at low price, gets down all the way to the Gulf Coast, and then some trader packages up and sells it to somebody else for a higher price, and we're not the ones getting the value of that. But it doesn't do anything to help us diversify markets. And this whole exercise we're going through is not to become more dependent on our U.S. neighbor. It's to be able to find new markets. And the only way to do that is you have to be able to build to the BC coast to be able to access those markets.
You had, last time I saw you was here at Stampede, and the next day you had Premier Ford standing next to you. I know that you've had other premiers step forward and say, show Alberta love, which was Premier Ford's message. How important is it for you and your province as you advocate with the federal government to be able to point to those other premiers, like you did at COF, or the polling that's come out recently, and say, look, the country is behind us. You can spend the political capital.
And I think both of those are important. We did some polling, and I wrote a letter to each of my premiers to tell them what the support for pipeline development was in their province. And it's above 70% in every province, with the exception of Quebec, where it's still 58%. So it is still a majority there. So that, I think, is influential, because that then gives the premiers, they can be emboldened to be able to push the envelope on some of these things. And each of them are. I mean, look at Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. He reversed the frack ban, and he's talking about developing natural gas. Look at Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, they've got a number of different projects that they're proposing. Manitoba launched its first gold mine in 15 years. British Columbia has sort of a golden triangle of 6 or 7 mines that they want to develop. So every single province, even the left-wing ones, are looking at ways that they can develop resources, develop new revenue streams, get new jobs. So I would say that it's been very influential to not only have the people say, we're prepared to do this, but to also have the premiers look at it from their own interest, because those C-69, although we call it the No New Pipelines Bill, is also the No New Mining Bill. And that's part of the reason why Doug's so frustrated. He's got this beautiful opportunity in Ring of Fire, and yet he's got this convoluted process that will never see a mine developed unless they streamline it.
The feds were blocking that for 2 years. So, okay, we've still got a couple minutes left. Good. Wanted to ask you about you mentioned that it's not placed on, the emissions cap is not placed on any other industry. I spoke to a gentleman in Toronto who owns a cement company now, and he was telling me about the impact of the industrial carbon tax. So they still got that. He said a ton of cement creates a ton of greenhouse gas emissions. So your cement is just going to keep getting more expensive due to the industrial carbon tax. But what would that do if you put the emissions cap on all these other industries? We'd have to stop building concrete buildings, wouldn't we?
Completely. Well, they'd have to find a way to abate, and if not, they'd shut in. You'd have to. Like if you put an arbitrary emissions cap in, which they have here, which says that you've got to be, I think, like 40% abated by 2030 and then 60% abated by 2035. If you can't reach those targets, it's just like what we're talking about with the net zero cars. If you can't build enough net zero cars, then you just have to reduce the amount of gas and diesel power cars that you sell. If you can't produce enough net zero cement, then you have to reduce the amount of CO2 laden cement that you produce. And so that's a spiral downwards. So we're getting very close to them having to realize reality. We're realizing reality here in Alberta, and if you look at Newfoundland and Labrador, look at the jobs numbers that just came out in the last week. Who are the two provinces most impacted? Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador are two oil and gas rich jurisdictions. So we are already experiencing the result of the last 10 years. Every other jurisdiction is not that far behind us. When you look at if we had gotten Northern Gateway built and Energy East and Keystone XL, we would be producing 2.5 million barrels of oil more per day, which would be generating $55 billion in GDP for our economy, of which the various levels of government get 40%. You can fill your NATO commitment with that money. You can make sure that you've got schools and hospitals and roads for that money. And if you don't have a new source of revenue, you just can't keep on borrowing forever, as we're seeing.
Back in April, you told me that the drop in the price of oil and all the other headwinds was going to result in a $5 billion deficit for your budget. That was your prediction then. It was $7 billion.
It's going to be.
So how much
so
money are?
Well, I'll say last year, because oil and gas prices did help us out, we also got more production to market. We ended up with an $8.3 billion surplus. We were only expecting $300 million. So that's the good news of what happens when you have that volatility. But when it goes down on the other end, we were expecting oil to be 68 this year. It's not hit 68 very many days in the first quarter. And so if it continues on at this rate.
For Western Canadian Select, it's at about what?
It's about $10 to $11. There's a differential, so you can normally price off what is WTI and then reduce it by $10 or $11. So we've been trending around $11 less than WTI. But if it continues at what we've seen in this first quarter, we're actually going to have a $6.5 billion deficit this year. So oil and gas is.
And then the feds lose out as well, right?
Of course they do, because if those companies are not profitable, the feds get their money from the corporate income taxes paid and the personal income taxes from the people who work in the industry, and they charge at much higher rates than we do. That's why we get our dollars from royalties, they get our dollars from corporate and personal income tax revenue. They're roughly equivalent, but they're just cutting themselves off when they cut off Alberta. And the other way of looking at it is everybody does well when Alberta does well. And Alberta has been historically happy to share the wealth. But what makes Albertans resentful is when we hear Eastern Canadian provincial premiers say, we don't want you to develop your resources, but keep sending us the money because we want the equalization. That is part of the frustration that we have.
Last question for you, and then we'll let people get to lunch. I'll circle back to pipelines. Is Churchill realistic for you? For oil and gas, for either liquefied natural gas or for oil exports? Because that's one that the Prime Minister seems to be willing to talk about.
It is, I don't want to discount the latest icebreaker technology, because I know that Russia's very heavily invested. I think they've got 30 icebreakers. So they have managed to use those to be able to get their product to market. We have none. I think the Americans have one, and it caught on fire a few months ago. So that gives you some idea about
that's not good.
How far behind we are. But it's our responsibility to be able to police and defend our north. And so I think that there's a good there's sort of good synergy between the economic interests we have and the defense imperatives that we have.
So it could be useful, but there needs to be infrastructure built to be able to do that.
So I think Churchill, or slightly south, because Churchill is also a tourism town, and so there is actually another little spin-off line that you could go that is just a port that is slightly further south, but it is also deep water, and they could do platforms there. And so we want to talk with the Premier to see what corridors make the most sense. But for sure, if you were able to build new rail infrastructure, highway infrastructure, port infrastructure, gas pipeline, a bitumen pipeline, and have the icebreakers to be able to make sure that you could have that exported more than 6 months a year, because I think it freezes over in November and doesn't thaw until May. That's the consideration, is a 6-month transit route going to be economic for anyone to do that, or does the icebreakers make it a 12-month transit route? And if that's the case, yes, because then you go up and over to Europe, and you can go up and over to the East Coast. So now you can start feeding the East Coast refineries so they don't have to import from Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and other places. So I would say that both of those are viable options. Going all the way, the proposal from Energy East, maybe not so much. When I talk to the industry, they look at the economics, they say the very first priority would be going to the Northwest BC coast. But we still have to figure out what the economics look like for Churchill.
All right. Despite some headwinds, I'm with you. I'm optimistic for Alberta's future and Canada's future. Premier, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.